AITA for teasing my friend about not recognizing my kid, thus ruining her marriage and an unrelated engagement party? I guess the best place to start is with a little background about my life. Because that's how all these things go, right? I'm in my late 30s. Married, with a 5-year-old son who's just the right mix of sweet and wild. You know the type, constantly asking, why, about everything. Running around the house with a superhero cape. And getting into the kind of mischief that makes you both laugh and tear your hair out at the same time. His name is Max, and he's the center of our world. The kid my wife and I dote on like there's nothing else that matters. Parenting changes you. I used to be the guy who could stay out late, hit the bars with friends, sleep until noon on the weekends. But those days are long gone. Now, my life revolves around school drop-offs, playdates, and what feels like an endless amount of laundry. And I'm okay with that. You shift your priorities when you become a parent. And what seemed important back in your 20s starts to fade into the background. That's where I am now. It's a good life, simple, stable, filled with little joys like watching Max learn to ride his bike or splash around in the pool. The thing about being in your late 30s is that your friend group evolves too. Most of my friends are now either married with kids or well on their way there. It's funny how the conversations shift from weekend plans and work gossip to diaper brands and school districts. When you're a parent, your social life becomes a lot more about family-friendly events, like BBQs in someone's backyard, trips to the park, or group outings to the local pool. It's just how life is when you're in this phase. And honestly, it's not bad. There's a comfort in the routine, in knowing that everyone is in the same boat as you, juggling work, kids, and trying to maintain some semblance of a social life. One of the people in our group is Emma. We go way back, college roommates. Actually, we were close back then. And it's one of those friendships that's carried through the years, even if we don't hang out one-on-one much anymore. Emma's married too, with a couple of kids of her own. Her husband, Greg, is a solid guy, though we've never really clicked beyond the typical small talk at group events. Emma's always been the type of person who's a little scattered, always running late, but she means well. She's one of those people you can count on to be there, even if it's 15 minutes after the fact. Our social circle is tight-knit but casual. We don't have any sort of official group or anything, but we tend to gravitate toward each other, probably because we're all at the same stage in life. Every few weeks, someone hosts a gathering at their place, and the kids run wild while the adults sip drinks and try to keep the chaos to a minimum. It's the kind of laid-back, suburban life I never thought I'd settle into. But here we are. A big part of being in this stage of life is navigating the constant balance between family time and trying to hold on to your friendships. It's harder than it sounds. You want to stay connected with your friends, but the reality is that everything now involves the kids. Playdates replace happy hours, and weekend plans revolve around who can host a group of kids without going insane. For the most part, it works. We've all gotten used to the madness that comes with it. And there's something comforting about seeing your friends go through the same things you are. Emma and I, like I said, don't hang out a ton outside of these group events anymore. It's just one of those things. Life pulls you in different directions. Especially when you've got families to manage. But whenever we do catch up, it's easy, like no time has passed. She's got a great sense of humor. And we've shared enough history that there's a certain shorthand in our conversations. Anyway, this story I'm about to tell you, well, it's kind of a mess. To be honest, it started out as nothing, just a small, silly joke, and somehow spiraled into something much bigger. I didn't mean for things to get as bad as they did. But once you set things in motion, sometimes there's no stopping it. It all started with something so simple, just a day at the pool with my wife and son. But it quickly became one of those moments where you wish you could rewind time. Just for a second, and stop yourself from saying the wrong thing. But I guess that's life. Isn't it? One moment you're laughing by the pool, and the next, you've inadvertently set off a chain of events that leads to a marriage falling apart and an engagement party being ruined. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all started. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. We had a Saturday planned, just me, my wife, and Max. The plan was simple. Hit the local pool early, grab a good spot, and let Max burn off some energy while we relaxed in the sun. That was our routine during the summer. Get there early, before the pool fills up. Snag a couple of lounge chairs by the shallow end. and let Max play with his water toys while we watched. It wasn't just our little family, though. You see, our outings often ended up turning into impromptu gatherings with other friends from our group. We'd send out a message in the group chat, and if anyone else was free, they'd swing by with their kids. And suddenly, a quiet day at the pool turned into a full-on playdate. That's how it was with Emma that day. She texted me asking what we were up to since her husband was out of town with work and she had the kids to herself. I told her we were headed to the pool and that she and the kids were welcome to join us whenever. So there we were, me, my wife, and Max, soaking up the early morning sun, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing just under the surface of this seemingly innocent day. At that moment, everything felt perfect, just another ordinary Saturday spent with the people I care about. It's funny how those moments can change so quickly, isn't it? The thing is, I had no idea that my casual offer to Emma would be the first step in a long, winding road toward the chaos that was about to unfold. At the time, it just felt like another friendly get-together, another day of summer fun. But, like I said, sometimes life has a way of surprising you, and this day was about to take a turn I never saw coming. Looking back, I realize how quickly things can unravel from what feels like the most harmless of actions. But in that moment, I was just enjoying the sun, laughing with Max as he splashed around in the water, completely unaware of the fallout that was headed my way. And if I could go back, I'm not sure what I would have done differently. If anything, all I know is that what happened next changed everything, in ways I never imagined. The days all seemed to blur together after a while, especially when you're living the family life. It's all school runs, packed lunches, and trying to squeeze in some kind of fun in between the mundane tasks that keep the household running. But one of the highlights, or at least the thing that kept me somewhat connected to my old self, was our little group of friends. Our routine get-togethers were predictable, comforting, and necessary, even if they had changed dramatically over the years. Most of us have known each other since college or shortly after. Back then, we bonded over classes, late-night study sessions, and even later nights out. Now we bond over kids and all the joys and struggles that come with raising them. We've all grown up, found partners, and started families of our own. And somewhere along the way, those wild weekends turned into casual BBQs, birthday parties for the little ones, and the occasional trip to the park. Emma was a key figure in this group. Even though we don't hang out one-on-one much anymore, she's still part of the fabric of my social life. We shared a lot of history from our college days. She was the type of person who'd come to your dorm at 2 a.m. just to vent about a bad day or rough exam. And back then, we were pretty close. It wasn't anything romantic, just a solid, dependable friendship built on a lot of shared experiences. And when you go through something like that with someone, there's a kind of bond that sticks with you, even if life pulls you in different directions. Nowadays, we mostly see each other at group events. It's the nature of life as you get older, you're either too busy, too tired, or both, but every once in a while, there's a group message, and we all try to come together. These gatherings are a bit of an escape from the day-to-day grind of parenting, work, and general adult responsibilities. Emma's kids are a bit older than Max. They're at that age where they're more independent but still young enough to want to tag along with their parents. Her husband, Greg, is a good guy, quiet, reserved, not the life of the party. But he's solid, the kind of guy who'll help you move furniture without asking for anything in return. But also the kind who probably wouldn't share much about what's going on in his own life unless you pressed him. And honestly, I never pressed. We weren't that kind of close. Most of our interactions were surface level, with the occasional deeper conversation when the moment allowed. I always felt like Emma was juggling a lot. She's always been the type to run late, lose her keys, and generally have that frantic energy of someone trying to balance more than they should. But I never held it against her. Life's messy, and we're all just trying to figure it out. So if Emma showed up half an hour late to a barbecue or forgot to RSVP to a playdate until the day of, no big deal. We'd just shrug it off. That's Emma. After all, she means well, and her heart's always in the right place, even if her timing isn't. Our gatherings were pretty standard, too. Usually a barbecue at someone's house, maybe a trip to the beach or the local park. And, more often than not, they were all about the kids. That's just the reality when most of the people in your life have little ones running around. You adjust. Conversations are interrupted by requests for snacks or minor playground injuries. And it's just part of the deal. Still, these gatherings are a kind of anchor in the chaos of family life. We all knew each other well enough to be comfortable, but none of us pried too much into each other's personal issues. We'd catch up, talk about our kids, laugh about how tired we were, and share a few beers before packing up and heading home at a reasonable hour. The days of staying out until 2 a.m. were long gone. But there was a different kind of satisfaction in these new routines. There's something nice about having people in your life who know you well enough to understand when you need a laugh. Or when you're just too tired to care about much else beyond what's in front of you. The gatherings at the pool were always a hit. Especially in the summer. There's something about being near water that just takes the edge off everything. Max, my son, loved the pool. He's at that age where everything is exciting. And the pool is like his personal adventureland. He could spend hours splashing around, pretending to be a superhero, or playing make-believe games with other kids. I always made it a point to bring extra toys when we went out. Not just for Max, but for other kids, too. It's something my wife and I had talked about. Raising an only child means you have to be extra aware of social interactions. We didn't want Max to grow up without learning how to share or play well with others. So I'd often bring along a couple of extra water pistols or remote control cars. Just to encourage group play. If some kid at the park or pool wanted to join in, I'd hand them a toy and let the kids take over. It worked like a charm most of the time. I'd sit back and watch Max play, calling out from the sidelines as I sipped a drink and chatted with other parents. There's something about watching your kid get along with others that makes you feel like you're doing all right as a parent. And I like getting to know the other parents, too. You'd be surprised how much you have in common with someone when you're both watching your kids try to outsplash each other in the pool. So when Emma texted me that day, asking what we were up to, inviting her along was just a natural extension of that routine. I figured she'd come by with her kids. And we'd spend the day like we always did, watching our kids play, chatting about life, and letting the hours drift by in the sun. And that's exactly what happened. Well, almost. We were already at the pool when Emma finally arrived. Later than planned, of course. By then, I was firmly settled in, watching Max and his friend from kindergarten soak each other with the water pistols I'd brought. My wife was swimming laps with another mom from the neighborhood, and I was holding down our spot by the shallow end. I'd already handed out most of the toys, but I had a few spares for Emma's kids when they finally got there. Emma showed up with a harried look, like she'd been wrestling her kids into the car and out the door in some kind of mad rush. Her kids immediately jumped into the pool, and I tossed them a couple of the extra water pistols I brought. They blended in quickly, joining the fray with Max and his friend. And for a while, everything was just easy. It was one of those days where the sun was bright, the water was cool, and the world felt right. We were laughing, enjoying the break from the everyday grind. And for a moment, it felt like nothing could go wrong. But, as it turns out, things can go wrong even on the best of days. And this was just the beginning of where everything started to unravel. That day at the pool started out so perfectly. I really should have known something was bound to go wrong. But at the time, I was completely oblivious. There's something about being in the sun, surrounded by the sound of kids laughing and splashing, that just makes you forget about anything that could possibly go sideways. I was leaning back in my chair, half watching the chaos unfold in front of me while Max and his friends were locked in an intense water gun battle. Life felt easy. We'd gotten to the pool early, snagged a prime spot right next to the shallow end, and had settled into our usual summer routine. Max was in his element, running around with a couple of his buddies, blasting anyone within range with a water pistol, including me. The kids were completely immersed in their imaginary game. Something about world domination through the power of water weapons. And I was playing the hapless villain trying to fend off their attacks. The morning was moving along just fine when Emma finally arrived. Later than she'd said she would. But that wasn't exactly a surprise. She came rushing in with her kids, all flustered and apologetic. I waved her over and handed her kids a couple of the extra water pistols I'd packed. They jumped right into the action, joining Max and his friend. And for a moment, everything was back to normal. I was sitting there, watching the kids go at it, occasionally shouting out something dramatic like, "Oh no, my evil plans, ruined again," which always got a laugh out of Max. I could see Emma visibly relax after a few minutes, finally settling into the moment. It was just one of those days that felt like summer in all the best ways. A little while later, my wife and Max's friend's mom came back from their swim. They'd been out in the deeper water for a while, enjoying their adult time while I held down the fort with the kids. My wife has always been the more social one between us. She's got this natural ease with people, making connections wherever she goes. It's one of the things I love about her. When she swims, she finds a way to chat with everyone from the lifeguard to the random person doing laps next to her. They both sat down next to me, drying off and laughing about something that had happened in the pool. I don't even remember what it was now, but in that moment, everything felt easy and comfortable. The kids were playing, the adults were chatting, and I was in that half daydream state you get into when you're not really thinking about anything except how warm the sun feels on your skin. And that's when it happened. Emma's kids were playing with Max. Everyone was having a good time, and her daughter ran over to grab one of the bigger toys I'd brought, a floaty thing shaped like a giant sea monster. It was one of those oversized, ridiculous pooled toys that never quite stays upright but somehow still ends up being the most popular thing for the kids to play with. Emma, watching the scene unfold, smiled and said, "Oh my God, he looks just like you." She wasn't talking about Max though, she was looking at Max's friend, the other boy playing with the toy. I laughed, more out of surprise than anything. The thing was, the kid did kind of look like me. He had the same brown hair, similar features, and, at first glance, I guess I could see how someone might make that mistake if they didn't know him well. But still, it was funny to me because Emma knew Max. She'd met him plenty of times. I figured she was just being distracted by all the kids running around. "Oh, I get it," I said, chuckling, "but that's not my kid." Emma laughed it off. "And so did I, no big deal. Right? Just one of those harmless moments. And besides, the kid was already off chasing Max and Emma's son with the sea monster float. So it wasn't like anyone was paying attention anymore." When my wife and the other mom sat back down, I told them about Emma's little mix-up, figuring they'd get a laugh out of it too. And they did. My wife laughed and said something like, "Well, he does kind of look like you," and we all just chuckled about it. It was one of those fleeting moments where you joke around and move on without giving it a second thought. At the time, that's exactly what it felt like, a simple, funny mix-up, nothing more. The day continued as it always did. We ate the snacks we'd packed. Max and the kids splashed around until they were exhausted, and by the time the sun started to dip lower in the sky, everyone was ready to pack it in. We gathered up our stuff, said our goodbyes, and headed home. But that pool day didn't just end there. As it turns out, that small moment, the one where Emma mistook another kid for my own, was just the beginning. And even though none of us thought anything of it at the time, it would come back later in a way that none of us could have seen coming. It was the kind of day that should have just faded into the background, like so many other summer afternoons. But, as I would soon learn, even the most harmless of moments can spiral out of control if the wrong pieces fall into place. A couple of months passed after that pool day, and I didn't think about it again. I hadn't seen Emma much since then, aside from the occasional group text about another BBQ or get-together. But nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Life carried on as usual. Max started kindergarten, and my wife and I were deep into the routine of school drop-offs, work, and trying to keep up with everything else. Then came another group gathering, a friend's party. Just a casual thing at their place with the usual crew. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. Just another laid-back afternoon of hanging out with friends. Kids running around, and adults trying to relax between interruptions. But that was the day things started to shift. I was on my second trip out to the car, carrying an armful of Max's toys and some leftovers we wanted to bring home when I saw Emma and her husband, Greg, near the front entrance. They were gathering their things, and it seemed like a good time to say goodbye. So I called out to Greg, "Hey, can you call my wife and kid over? Just make sure it's actually my kid this time and not some random kid who looks like me." I thought it was hilarious. You know, a callback to the pool incident, a little inside joke between friends. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I could see something shift in Greg's expression. He wasn't laughing. In fact, he looked confused and, dare I say, angry. Emma wasn't laughing either. I stopped in my tracks, the smile fading from my face. "What's wrong?" I asked. genuinely puzzled. Greg just stared at me for a moment before saying, "What the hell are you talking about? Why would I call a random kid?" I tried to explain the pool story, thinking maybe he'd just forgotten about it or hadn't heard the full context. I started recounting how Emma had thought Max's friend looked like me, and how we'd all laughed it off. But the more I talked, the less amused Greg seemed. He wasn't finding the humor in it, and by the time I finished, the whole interaction felt heavy and uncomfortable. Emma just stood there, not saying a word, but the tension between her and Greg was palpable. I felt like I'd stepped into something I wasn't supposed to be part of. The laughter from that pool day seemed a lifetime away, and I had no idea why. We all said an awkward goodbye, and I left feeling uneasy, like I'd missed some crucial piece of information. But even then, I had no idea just how bad things were about to get. After that uncomfortable moment at the party, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. You know when you make a joke, and it falls flat? That's what this felt like. Except worse. I replayed the whole thing in my head as I drove home, wondering if I'd said something out of line without realizing it. It had just been a harmless callback to a funny moment, right? Emma had laughed about it at the pool, and my wife thought it was hilarious at the time. So why did Greg seem so angry? The confusion was gnawing at me, but I told myself to let it go. Maybe it was just one of those weird moments that would blow over with time. The next few days passed in a blur of the usual routine. Work, school drop-offs, making dinner, and trying to keep Max entertained. I'd almost forgotten about the awkward interaction with Greg until I realized that Emma hadn't responded to the few texts I'd sent her after the party. That was strange. Emma was usually the type to reply, even if it was just a quick, "Sorry, busy," or a funny emoji. But this time? Radio silence. I sent her another message. Something casual like, "Hey, everything good?" That was an awkward moment the other day. "Hope all is okay." And then I waited. A day passed. 2. Still nothing. Now, I'm not the type to chase people down for a response. If someone doesn't want to talk to me, fine, I'm not going to force the issue. But it felt weird, you know? It's that nagging feeling when you know something's off, and it starts to settle into the pit of your stomach. I thought maybe she was mad about the joke. Maybe Greg had overreacted, and they'd had an argument about it later. If that was the case, I figured she just needed some space. So I decided to leave it alone. I told myself I'd give it a week or so and then try again. Except I never got the chance. About a week later, I found out through another friend in the group that Emma and Greg were having problems. Not just the normal kind of problems that every couple goes through, but real, serious issues. Apparently, Greg had gotten upset after that pool joke. Way more upset than I could have imagined. From what I heard, Emma had made a similar comment once before. Not about Max's friend but about another kid. And it had stirred up some trouble in their marriage. I didn't know the full details at the time, but there was something about infidelity in Greg's family. Emma had joked about another kid looking like someone he wasn't supposed to. And it had struck a nerve. Hearing that felt like a punch to the gut. I had no idea that my joke at the pool, when I thought was innocent, had hit so close to home for them. Apparently, Greg had connected the dots in the worst way possible. He thought I knew about the previous incident, the family drama, and that I'd brought it up to embarrass Emma, to stir the pot, and in his mind, if I knew, it meant Emma had told me about it, which made the whole thing even worse. Suddenly, it wasn't just a joke anymore. It was ammunition in a long-standing battle between them, one that I didn't even know existed. I felt sick. I couldn't believe that something so small had triggered all of this. All those times Emma had laughed with us about the pool incident. Was she hiding how much it bothered her? Was she trying to keep the peace between me and Greg, knowing that her husband might react badly if he found out? I didn't have the answers. But I knew one thing for sure. I had stepped into something way bigger than I could handle. At this point, I wanted to reach out to Emma again, but I was scared to. What was I supposed to say? "Sorry I ruined your marriage over a dumb joke." That seemed like an understatement. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized there might not be a way to fix this. Some things, once said, can't be unsaid. Days went by, and I kept replaying everything in my mind, trying to figure out what I could have done differently. I didn't know about the history with Greg. I didn't know that Emma had already caused trouble with a similar comment. And I sure as hell didn't know that my little joke would be the final straw in whatever was going on between them. But even as I tried to reason with myself, the guilt crept in. I should have read the room better. Maybe I should have pulled Greg aside after that awkward moment at the party and explained myself right then and there. But I didn't. And now it was too late. Then came the engagement party. I wasn't even planning on going at first. My wife and I had been invited, but she couldn't make it because Max had come down with a fever. So I almost stayed home too. But at the last minute, I decided to go. I figured I could swing by, offer my congratulations, and then head home early. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time. As soon as I walked in, I saw Emma, and the second she saw me, I knew I'd made a mistake by coming. Her face changed immediately. She was furious, more angry than I'd ever seen her before. It wasn't just the usual frustration or annoyance I'd seen in the past when she was late or running around with her kids. This was something deeper. I could feel the tension between us as soon as our eyes met. And I suddenly realized I wasn't ready for whatever was about to happen. Before I could say a word, Emma stormed over to me, her voice low but seething with anger. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she hissed, barely containing herself. I was taken aback. I didn't even know what to say. "Emma, no," she interrupted. "You ruined everything. Do you even realize what you did?" Her words hit me like a slap. I stood there, stunned, as she unloaded on me in front of everyone. I could feel eyes on us. People glancing over as Emma's voice started to rise. She didn't care about the scene she was causing. I was the target, and she wasn't going to let me off the hook. "You think that stupid joke was funny? You think it's hilarious to make me look like an idiot in front of my husband? You know what you did. And now look at us. We're separated because of you. You ruined everything." I tried to apologize, to explain that I didn't know, that I had no idea about the issues between her and Greg. But she wasn't having it. "Don't you dare make excuses," she snapped. "You knew. You must have known. How else would you think that joke was okay? You threw me under the bus. And now everyone knows about it. It's your fault." It was like the room was closing in around me. I felt my chest tighten, my pulse quicken. I looked around, hoping to find some kind of escape. But all I saw were the faces of people I considered friends, watching me get torn apart. I had no idea how to fix this. No words that would make things better. "I'm sorry," I muttered, feeling helpless. "I didn't mean to." Emma cut me off again. "It doesn't matter what you meant. What matters is what you did." I wanted to disappear. The engagement party, which was supposed to be a celebration, had turned into an absolute disaster. People were whispering, looking between me and Emma, and I could tell that word was already spreading. This wasn't just between me and her anymore. Everyone was going to hear about it. And that's when I realized that it wasn't just her marriage I'd ruined. I'd ruined this party too. I'd ruined my place in this group of friends. The connections we'd built over the years. Everything felt like it was unraveling all at once. And I couldn't stop it. I apologized again, fumbling through the words, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Emma stormed off, leaving me standing there like a fool in the middle of the party, surrounded by whispers and judgmental stares. I didn't stay long after that. I offered a quick, half-hearted congratulations to the couple, who were clearly upset by the scene that had just unfolded at their engagement party. And I left. Driving home that night, I felt hollow. I knew I'd messed up, but I still didn't understand how everything had spiraled so far out of control. What started as a small joke had led to the destruction of a marriage, the fallout of a friendship, and now the awkwardness of knowing that I'd made a spectacle of myself at someone's engagement party. I didn't know what to do next. All I knew was that things would never be the same again. After the engagement party, there was a strange, deafening silence that followed me everywhere. It was like I had entered some kind of social purgatory, where no one outright said anything to me, but I could feel the shift in the air. That's the worst part about these kinds of situations. No one really tells you what's going on, but you can feel it. It was in the quietness of group texts that used to be full of banter. It was in the way people hesitated before responding to my messages, or how they didn't respond at all. For the first few days after the party, I didn't hear from anyone. Not Emma, not Greg, and not even the engaged couple whose party I had unintentionally derailed. I half expected Emma to message me, maybe to keep the argument going or to try to clarify what had happened. But she didn't. The silence, her lack of any further confrontation, made the guilt settle even deeper in my chest. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, her face, The anger. The way she accused me of destroying her marriage in front of everyone. I couldn't shake it. I didn't tell my wife right away. She was at home with Max the night of the party. And by the time I got home, Max was asleep, and she was half asleep on the couch. I didn't want to wake her just to unload my disaster of an evening. I figured I'd talk to her in the morning. But by then, I was already second-guessing everything that had happened. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it felt? Maybe Emma was just upset in the moment, and things would blow over soon? But as the days went on, that hope started to fade. I'd text a few people from the group. Just casual messages to see if anyone wanted to grab a beer or hang out at the park with the kids. And the replies came, but they were different now, short, clipped responses that barely acknowledged the invitation. Busy this weekend, maybe next time, got a lot going on right now. You know how when people don't want to see you, but they don't want to come right out and say it? That was what was happening. And it sucked. I could feel myself being edged out of the group. Not in a dramatic or explicit way, but in the slow, subtle way that people start to drift away when they don't want to deal with you anymore. I hadn't realized how much I relied on those gatherings, on those friendships, to keep me connected to something beyond my work and family. It's strange, but when you're a parent, your social life becomes this delicate web that's half held together by your kids' friendships and the mutual understanding between other exhausted adults. And when that starts to fray, it feels like a whole part of your life is unraveling. Eventually, I had to tell my wife. She could sense that something was off. And when she asked me for the 5th time why I hadn't made plans with anyone lately, I knew I couldn't keep dodging the question. We were sitting at the kitchen table. Max was playing in the living room, and I just came out with it. I told her about the joke, about Emma's reaction at the party, and how it all seemed to be spiraling into something much bigger than I'd ever intended. At first, she laughed, actually laughed, because she thought I was exaggerating. She knew Emma, knew her tendency to overreact to things, and she thought it was just one of those dramatic moments that would blow over. But when I told her about the marriage issues, about how Greg thought the joke was part of some bigger plot to embarrass him, her face changed. "Oh, wow," she said, leaning back in her chair. "I didn't realize it was that serious." "Yeah," I muttered, staring down at my hands. "Neither did I." For a moment, we sat in silence. I could hear Max's toys clattering together in the next room, the soft hum of life continuing on even as I felt like my social world was collapsing around me. I was hoping for some kind of reassurance from her, something that would make me feel better. But all she could say was, "Well, what do you want to do about it?" And that's when it hit me. I didn't know what to do. I had no idea how to fix this. How do you go back and undo something like that? How do you make amends when your joke was the final straw in someone else's marriage? I didn't even know if Emma wanted to hear from me again. And Greg certainly didn't. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't think I can do anything at this point." My wife nodded, thoughtful. "Well, maybe just give it time. People get upset, but they move on. It was a joke, an unfortunate one, but it wasn't like you did it on purpose." She was trying to be supportive. I knew that, and part of me wanted to believe that time would heal this mess. That eventually, Emma and Greg would sort out their issues, and things would go back to normal. But another part of me knew that wasn't going to happen. The fallout wasn't just about the joke, it was about something deeper. Something I had accidentally stumbled into without even knowing it. I had unknowingly cracked open a wound in their marriage that had been festering long before I made my stupid comment. I was just the spark that lit the fire. And now I was watching it burn everything down from the sidelines. A few more days passed, and the silence became unbearable. I didn't reach out to Emma again, partly out of fear, partly out of respect for the fact that maybe she didn't want to hear from me. But I did try to reach out to some of our other friends. I wanted to know what they thought, how they were feeling about the whole thing. But the conversations were awkward, stilted. No one wanted to pick a side, at least not openly. Some of them seemed to think that I'd gotten caught in the crossfire of something bigger than me, while others thought the joke was in poor taste, especially considering Emma and Greg's history. No one outright said I was to blame, but I could tell some of them thought I had at least a part in it. And others? Well, others just didn't want to talk about it at all. It wasn't long before I started hearing through the grapevine that Emma and Greg were officially separated. Not divorced, at least not yet, but separated. That hit me hard. I wasn't naive enough to think that their marriage had been perfect before my joke. But knowing that I had played a part in pushing them over the edge? That was a heavy burden to carry. I'd sit there at night, lying in bed next to my wife, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the moments that led up to that joke. All the little things I didn't know were brewing beneath the surface. Emma's smile at the pool, her laugh when I first made the joke, it all felt like some kind of strange dream now. Something that had happened in a different world. My wife tried to reassure me, saying things like, "You couldn't have known," or, "It's not your fault, their marriage was already on the rocks." But it didn't help. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was responsible for at least part of it. And then there was the engagement party. The fallout from that was still fresh. I hadn't heard from the couple since. And I knew from mutual friends that my little confrontation with Emma had become the centerpiece of gossip at the event. The whole engagement party, which was supposed to be about celebrating their love, had been overshadowed by Emma's outburst and my part in it. I'd made a spectacle of myself without even meaning to. The silence from my friends, the distance that was growing between us, it was suffocating. And I had no idea how to fix it. As more days passed, I started piecing together the full picture. Bits and pieces of Emma's family drama slowly made their way to me through our mutual friends. I never asked directly, because let's face it, nobody likes to admit they're the one stirring the pot. But sometimes people just talk. And when they do, they fill in the gaps you didn't even know existed. That's how I found out what was really going on with Emma and Greg. It wasn't just my joke. My joke was like the final drop in a bucket that was already overflowing. Apparently, a couple of years ago, Emma had made a similar comment to Greg's family. But this time, it wasn't just an innocent observation. The story went something like this. Greg's cousin, who they were pretty close with, had a kid, cute little kid, a bit older than Max. At some family function, Emma, in her usual bubbly and oblivious way, made a joke about how this kid looked a lot like someone who wasn't the dad. It was one of those offhand remarks, meant to be funny. Not serious, but it landed in the worst way possible. Turns out, the family already had suspicions about the child's paternity. Whispers that maybe the kid wasn't the cousin's biological son. Emma, completely unaware of this ongoing family drama, unknowingly struck a nerve. What she thought was just a harmless observation opened up a floodgate of tension that had been simmering beneath the surface. The family started fighting. Accusations were thrown around. And, as it turned out, the kid really wasn't the cousin's biological child. The mother had been unfaithful. And Emma's comment had inadvertently sparked a chain reaction that led to the family imploding. I had no idea about any of this. How could I? Emma, it seems, had gotten a taste of what it feels like to accidentally blow up someone else's life. And even though she didn't do it on purpose, the fallout had left scars, especially for Greg. Apparently, Greg was furious when all of that went down. He was embarrassed, mortified that his wife had said something that caused so much pain in his family. And though they tried to move past it, the tension lingered. Greg and Emma had never been the same since. I found out through one of our mutual friends, someone who had been close to both Greg and Emma for years, that Greg had warned Emma after that incident. He told her to be more careful with her words, especially when it came to family, especially when it came to sensitive topics like that. And she had promised to be more mindful. They'd gone through counseling, tried to work through the hurt and distrust that had been lingering ever since that day. But the cracks in their marriage were already showing, and it didn't take much to make them wider. That's why my joke hit so hard. For me, it was just a throwaway line, something I thought would get a laugh. For Greg, it was like watching history repeat itself. Emma making another careless comment about someone else's kid, dragging up the old wounds that had never fully healed. Except this time, it wasn't some distant cousin. This time, it was Emma's own life being pulled apart. Knowing all this, I could finally understand why Greg reacted the way he did at the party. He didn't see my joke as a harmless callback to a funny moment. He saw it as another instance of Emma not learning from her mistakes, of her not taking the gravity of those past mistakes seriously enough. He saw it as Emma's failure to protect their marriage from the kind of casual chaos she always seemed to create. From his perspective, my joke wasn't just a joke. It was a confirmation that Emma hadn't changed, that she was still making the same mistakes that had led to so much pain before. And the fact that I didn't know about the previous incident didn't matter to him. He saw me as part of the problem, as someone who was taking Emma's side, maybe even enabling her thoughtless behavior. I felt a pit in my stomach when I realized all this. I had stepped into the middle of something much bigger than I could have imagined. All this time, I thought I was just being funny. Just keeping things light, but Emma and Greg had been carrying around this deep, unspoken tension for years, and my joke had ripped it wide open again. At that point, I didn't know if there was any way to fix things. How could I? I was just a bystander in their story. A well-meaning idiot who had accidentally hit a sore spot I didn't even know existed. And what made it worse was that Greg didn't believe Emma when she said she hadn't told me about the family drama. To him, it looked like Emma had confided in me about their darkest moments. And that I'd used that information to mock them. No matter what Emma told him, he couldn't get past the idea that she had betrayed him by sharing their personal struggles with a friend. The trust that had already been fragile between them was now completely shattered. I remember sitting in the living room after I found all of this out. Just staring blankly at the wall, trying to wrap my head around it. How did something as innocent as a day at the pool lead to this? How had I ended up here? At the center of a marriage crumbling apart over a misunderstanding? I wanted to call Emma. To apologize. To explain that I had no idea about any of this. That I never would have made the joke if I had known. But would it even matter? Could an apology undo the damage that had already been done? And what about Greg? He wasn't going to believe me. No matter what I said. From his point of view, I was complicit in Emma's thoughtlessness. Whether I meant to be or not, I didn't know if there was any way to come back from that. I tried to talk to my wife about it again, to make sense of how everything had spiraled so far out of control. She was sympathetic, but even she didn't know what to say. You couldn't have known, she repeated, but it felt hollow now. Knowing that I hadn't meant to hurt anyone didn't make the situation any better. The fact remained. I had hurt them, whether I'd intended to or not. Over the next few days, I started hearing from more friends in the group. Everyone had their version of the story. Some people thought I was being unfairly blamed for something that wasn't really my fault. Others felt like I should have known better. Like I should have read the room and realized that maybe my joke was in poor taste. Considering Emma's history. And then there were the people who were just trying to stay out of it. Those were the ones who said things like, "It's complicated," or, "I don't want to get involved." They didn't want to take sides. And I couldn't really blame them. Who wants to get caught in the middle of a marriage falling apart? But even with all the explanations and rationalizations, the fact remained that my friendships were starting to fracture. There was this unspoken tension now whenever I was around. People weren't openly blaming me, but they weren't exactly comfortable with me either. It was like I had become this walking reminder of the mess that was Emma and Greg's marriage. And no one wanted to talk about it. I kept thinking back to that pool day. To the way Emma had laughed when she'd mistaken the other kid for mine. In that moment, everything had seemed so simple. So light. And now, here we were, Emma and Greg separated. Our group of friends torn apart. And me, left holding the guilt of it all. I still didn't know what to do. I didn't know if there was anything I could do. But one thing was certain, the easy, carefree friendships I'd taken for granted were gone. And nothing was ever going to be the same again. I wasn't supposed to be at the engagement party. Originally, my wife and I had planned to skip it. Between work, Max, and everything else going on, it just didn't seem like the right time for a big social gathering. But at the last minute, my wife suggested I go alone. She said it would be good for me to get out of the house. Clear my head, maybe reconnect with some of our friends. Max was feeling better by then, and she promised they'd be fine without me for a few hours. So, I went. I don't know why I thought it would be a good idea. Maybe part of me was hoping that things would blow over if I just showed up. Smiled, and acted like nothing was wrong. Maybe I thought Emma and Greg wouldn't be there, and I could slip in, say congratulations to the happy couple, and leave without causing any drama. I should have known better. As soon as I walked through the door, I felt the shift in the room. It wasn't immediate, but it was there, a subtle change in the way people looked at me. The way conversations quieted slightly when I passed by. It wasn't enough to be overt, but I could feel it. People knew. The story of what happened at the last gathering had spread. And now I was the guy who had apparently ruined Emma and Greg's marriage. I scanned the room, hoping to find a friendly face. Someone who wasn't caught up in the drama. I spotted a few people I knew. But no one made any move to come over and talk. Everyone seemed locked in their own conversations. avoiding eye contact with me as though they didn't want to be associated with whatever trouble I might bring. Then I saw her. Emma. She was standing near the back of the room, talking to a group of friends. But as soon as she saw me, her face darkened. I could feel the anger radiating from her even from across the room. She hadn't expected me to be here. That much was clear. And to be honest, I hadn't expected her to be here either. I hadn't seen her or Greg since the last time we awkwardly parted ways. And part of me had been hoping that she wouldn't show. But there she was, and she looked ready to unleash hell. I froze. I wasn't ready for a confrontation. Not in the middle of someone's engagement party. I had come here to make a quick appearance. Not to get caught up in the mess that had become my life. But before I could even think about turning around and leaving, Emma was walking straight toward me. The room seemed to shrink as she approached. Her eyes locked on me with a fury I hadn't seen before. My stomach twisted in knots. I tried to brace myself. But I had no idea what was about to happen. "You've got some nerve showing up here," she said through gritted teeth, keeping her voice low enough not to attract too much attention but just loud enough to make sure I knew she was serious. "Emma, I started. But she cut me off before I could even get a word in. "Do you even realize what you've done?" Her voice was shaking, and I could see the effort it was taking her to keep from causing a full-on scene. "You ruined everything. My marriage, my life, everything. And you think you can just show up here like nothing happened?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to respond. But nothing came out. I wanted to explain, to tell her that I hadn't meant to cause any of this. But the words died in my throat. How could I even begin to explain? The truth was, no matter what I said, it wouldn't change the fact that things were broken beyond repair. I didn't know. "Emma," I finally managed to say. My voice barely audible. "I swear, I didn't know about your family stuff. I never would've." "You didn't know?" She cut me off again, her voice rising slightly as she took a step closer. "You didn't know, and that makes it okay? You think that makes it better? You think that excuses what you did?" I could feel the eyes of people around us starting to shift in our direction. Even though she was trying to keep it low, people were noticing. The whispers were starting, the curious glances, the slow realization that something was going down. The last thing I wanted was to turn this into a full-blown spectacle. Especially not at someone else's engagement party. But Emma was on a roll now. And there was no stopping her. "You don't get it, do you?" she hissed, her eyes blazing. "It's not just about what you said. It's about what it did. Greg thinks I've been talking about our problems to everyone. He thinks I told you about what happened with his cousin. That I've been airing our dirty laundry behind his back. He doesn't trust me anymore. And that's on you. You opened that door. And now everything's falling apart." I felt like the room was spinning. I tried to respond, to apologize again, but my mouth was dry. And the words weren't coming fast enough. "I'm sorry," I stammered, feeling the weight of her words crash down on me. "Emma, I swear, I never meant for this to happen. If I'd known." "But you didn't know, did you?" she snapped, her voice rising again. "You never know. You just run your mouth without thinking about the consequences. And now I'm the one paying for it." At this point, people were openly watching us. The whispering had intensified, and I could feel the room shifting around us. The happy, celebratory atmosphere of the engagement party had been completely overshadowed by this confrontation. And I knew there was no way to pull it back. "Look, I'll leave," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I don't want to make this worse. I'll go. I shouldn't have come." "You're damn right you shouldn't have," Emma shot back. "This isn't about you. You don't get to just walk away from this and pretend it's not your fault." Her words cut deep. I had no defense left. No argument. No way to make this right. All I could do was stand there, feeling the weight of my guilt crush me from the inside. She was right. This wasn't about me. But somehow, I'd made it about me. Even without meaning to. And now, here we were, with her life in pieces and me standing in the middle of it like an idiot who didn't know better. "Emma, I'm sorry," I said again, my voice barely a whisper now. "I wish I could take it back. I wish I could fix this. But I don't know how." "Yeah, well, it's too late for that," she said coldly, her anger hardening into something else, something like disgust. "You've done enough damage." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there in the middle of the room, feeling like the biggest idiot in the world. I could feel the stares of everyone around me, the awkwardness thick in the air. I didn't know what to do. Should I just leave? Should I try to explain myself to the engaged couple? But what was there to explain? That I'd just been publicly humiliated at their engagement party? That their big day had been overshadowed by the disaster I'd created? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I needed to get out of there before things got worse. Before I made an even bigger scene. I found the couple, awkwardly muttered a quick congratulations, and left. I could tell from their strained smiles that they were already annoyed by the scene that had just unfolded. But they were polite enough not to say anything. As I walked out the door, I could feel the eyes of the room following me, and I knew that by the time I got home, the story would already be spreading through our entire friend group. Emma had made sure of that. Driving home that night, I felt hollow. It was over. Whatever friendships I had left were probably done now. I'd just become the guy who couldn't keep his mouth shut. The guy who brought drama to someone else's engagement party. And the guy who apparently ruined a marriage with a single careless joke. There was no coming back from this. After the engagement party, I knew things were different. But I wasn't prepared for just how fast everything would unravel. It was like someone flipped a switch. The social fallout hit me harder than I expected. And it happened almost overnight. People I had considered friends for years, friends I'd gone to college with, friends who had watched Max grow up, began to distance themselves. They didn't say it outright, but the signs were there, in the same quiet way that had been building ever since the pool incident. I didn't hear from anyone for a while. Normally, we'd all exchange texts about the next group hangout or plan some casual get-together for the kids. But my phone stayed quiet. The group chat, which had been lively and full of conversation just weeks before, was now eerily silent for me. I'd see notifications pop up from time to time, people talking about plans I wasn't included in, and it hit me hard. I wasn't just being ghosted, I was being actively cut out. I tried reaching out to a few of the people I was closest to, hoping to clear the air or, at the very least, figure out what was going on. I started with Jake, one of the guys I had known the longest. We'd bonded over our mutual love of sports and had spent countless Saturdays watching football and knocking back beers together. If anyone would still be on my side, it would be him, right? I shot him a casual text. Something along the lines of, "Hey man, it's been a while. Wanna grab a beer this weekend? Catch up?" I hit send and waited. Hours passed, no reply. By the next day, I knew he wasn't going to respond. That silence, that same cold, empty silence that had followed me ever since Emma's outburst, was now becoming my constant companion. I checked social media, hoping to find some sign that things weren't as bad as they seemed. But the evidence was clear. A photo from a barbecue I wasn't invited to. Another from a kid's birthday party that Max and I had somehow missed. It wasn't just that I wasn't included. It was that they hadn't even bothered to ask anymore. The more I scrolled, the more I realized just how deep the fallout was. I wasn't just on the outs with Emma and Greg. The entire friend group had shifted. Lines had been drawn, and while some people might have still been sympathetic, no one wanted to get involved. I was radioactive, a walking reminder of the drama that had torn apart the group's comfortable, easy dynamic. No one wanted to choose sides. But by staying silent, they had already chosen. I started to hear things through the grapevine, bits of conversation. Whispers passed along through mutual friends. Some people thought I was being unfairly blamed. That Emma had overreacted and Greg had used the situation as an excuse for their already strained marriage. Others thought I should have known better. That the joke had been in poor taste considering everything Emma had been through. Everyone had an opinion, but no one wanted to say it to my face. One day, I ran into Emma's best friend, Sarah, at the grocery store. She was pushing a cart, her 2 kids in tow, and we locked eyes before she could turn and avoid me. There was an awkward moment where we both pretended not to see each other. But then, almost out of obligation, we ended up in the same aisle, making small talk. "Hey, how's it going?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, as if the last few weeks hadn't been a complete disaster. She gave me a tight smile. "Oh, busy with the kids. Same old." There was a beat of uncomfortable silence. I could feel the tension in the air, and I knew what was coming next. She hesitated, then said, "Listen, about everything with Emma. It's, really complicated." That phrase again. Complicated. It had become the catch-all excuse people used when they didn't want to get involved. When they didn't want to say outright what they really thought. "Yeah, I get that," I replied, trying to keep my tone light even though my stomach was twisting in knots. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It was just a stupid joke. She nodded, but there was something in her eyes, pity. Maybe? Or was it judgment? I couldn't tell anymore. I know you didn't mean it. But, it's hard. You know? Emma's really upset. And Greg, well, they're both going through a lot right now. I know, I said, feeling the weight of her words. But it wasn't just me. There was more going on between them. Right? Sarah's face shifted slightly, like she didn't want to say what she was thinking. Look, it's not my place to say. But Greg's really hurt. And yeah, maybe their marriage was already in trouble. But this, it didn't help. That stung. I nodded, thanked her for the chat, and quickly excused myself, knowing that the conversation wasn't going anywhere productive. As I walked out of the store, I realized that even the people who might have understood, who might have been on my side, were keeping their distance. The group had splintered, and I was left on the outside, watching the pieces fall where they may. Some friends had clearly sided with Emma, others with Greg, and the rest were just trying to avoid the whole mess. But I was stuck in the middle, blamed for something that had spiraled so far beyond my control. The hardest part was watching the friendships fade. I'd known these people for years. We'd been through so much together, weddings, kids, the ups and downs of life. But now, it was as if all of that history didn't matter. My phone stayed silent, the invitations stopped coming, and the few people I did manage to talk to were always hesitant. Like they didn't want to get too close in case they got dragged into the mess with me. The silence grew heavier with each passing day, and I felt the weight of it in everything I did. I'd sit in the living room with my wife, watching Max play with his toys, and feel this crushing sense of isolation. She was supportive, of course, telling me that it wasn't my fault, that people would come around eventually. But I wasn't so sure anymore. Because it wasn't just about Emma and Greg. It was about how fragile those friendships had been all along. How one wrong step, one careless comment, could pull the whole thing apart like a thread in a sweater. And once that thread started unraveling, there was no stopping it. The hardest part was the guilt. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the pool incident, the joke, the engagement party, wondering what I could have done differently. Could I have stopped it? Could I have somehow prevented all of this from happening? I didn't know. All I knew was that I was stuck in the aftermath, watching my social circle disintegrate, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. There were moments when I wanted to reach out to Emma again, to try and apologize one last time, to explain that I hadn't known, that I'd never meant to hurt her, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. What good would it do? The damage was done. Emma had made it clear that she didn't want to hear from me. And Greg? Well, I wasn't sure he'd ever forgive me, even if I apologized 1,000 times. So, I stayed silent, and the silence stretched on, becoming a part of my life, like a shadow that followed me everywhere. I'd see photos pop up on social media, people I used to call friends, gathering without me, and each one felt like another nail in the coffin of my old life. At the end of the day, I realized that friendships, especially the kind you build in adulthood, are fragile things. They can survive a lot, distance, time, disagreements, but sometimes, all it takes is one mistake, one moment of bad judgment, to shatter everything you thought was solid. And once those pieces fall apart, there's no putting them back together. The social fallout was real, and there was no escaping it. I was on the outside looking in now, and I had to live with that. Losing friends isn't like losing a job or breaking up with someone. It's quieter, slower, and it sneaks up on you until one day you realize they're just gone. That's what it felt like as the weeks went by. I didn't lose all of my friends in one big dramatic moment. There were no blowouts, no shouting matches. It was more like watching sand slip through my fingers, bit by bit, until there was nothing left. And by the time I noticed, it was too late to do anything about it. After the engagement party fiasco, the social distancing from my friends became more pronounced. At first, I thought it was temporary, just a cooling off period where people needed time to let the dust settle. Maybe they didn't want to get involved in the whole Emma and Greg situation. Maybe they just needed a break from the drama. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that it wasn't just a temporary pause. I had become a pariah in my own social circle, and I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to come back from it. The group texts that used to buzz with plans for BBQs, park outings, And weekend get-togethers now went silent for me. I'd see the occasional message pop up, but they were more and more infrequent. And when I did reply to suggest plans or ask how people were doing, my messages were met with delayed responses, or worse, none at all. I didn't want to admit it to myself at first, but it was obvious. People were pulling away from me, one by one. It wasn't just about Emma and Greg anymore. Sure, their drama was the catalyst, but the fallout was affecting everyone. Some friends didn't want to get caught in the middle, afraid of picking sides and making things worse. Others were probably worried that being associated with me would drag them into the mess. And maybe, just maybe, some of them had silently judged me for the role I played in the whole thing. Even if it was unintentional. I wasn't sure which of those scenarios hurt more, the idea that my friends didn't want to deal with me, or the fear that they actually thought I was to blame for tearing apart Emma and Greg's marriage. Either way, it didn't matter. The end result was the same. I was losing them. It wasn't long before I started seeing more signs of the social divide. I'd scroll through social media and see photos of events I hadn't been invited to. There was a cookout at Jake's place. And there, in the background, were the familiar faces of our friends, laughing, drinking, enjoying the summer sun, all without me. A couple of weeks later, another picture popped up. This time, it was a family day at the park. A few of the kids I knew were playing together. Max's friends. And there was Emma, smiling like everything was fine. And again, I hadn't even known about it. The hardest part was explaining it to Max. He didn't understand why he wasn't getting to see his friends as much anymore. One day, he asked me if we could go to the park to meet up with Jake's kids. And I had to tell him they weren't going to be there. His face fell, and that crushed me in a way I wasn't prepared for. Why not, Dad? Don't they want to play with me anymore? I wanted to tell him it wasn't about him. That this had nothing to do with the kids and everything to do with the adults being idiots. But what could I say? How do you explain to a 5-year-old that sometimes adults make mistakes? And those mistakes ripple out in ways that aren't fair? I couldn't, so I just said, "We'll see them soon, buddy," even though I wasn't sure if that was true. In the following weeks, the invitations dried up completely. It wasn't just casual avoidance anymore, it was a clear, deliberate choice to exclude me. I'd hear about gatherings after the fact. Always secondhand. A friend would mention something in passing. Like, "Oh, last weekend we went to the beach with everyone," and I'd nod, pretending like I hadn't noticed that I wasn't invited. At first, I told myself it was just bad luck. Maybe they forgot to send the invite. Maybe they assumed I was busy. Or maybe it was just a one-time thing. But the truth became harder to ignore as it happened again and again. The silence from the people I'd considered close friends wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. It hit hardest with Jake. We'd been friends for years. Long before the whole group came together through spouses and kids. We used to spend hours watching games, going out for drinks, just shooting the breeze about life. I figured if anyone would stick by me, it would be him. But even Jake started pulling back. One night, after seeing yet another social media post of a get-together I hadn't been invited to, I called him. I needed to know what was going on, why he was avoiding me. He answered, but I could tell immediately that something had shifted between us. "Hey, man," I started, trying to keep my tone light. "What's going on? Haven't heard from you in a while." There was a pause. I could hear the discomfort in his voice. "Yeah, sorry about that. Things have just been busy. You know, work, kids, life, it's been crazy." I knew that was a lie. We'd always been busy, but we used to make time for each other. Now, he wasn't even trying. "I get that," I replied, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "But it feels like something's off. We haven't hung out in weeks. And I've noticed I'm not really getting invited to stuff anymore. Is there something I need to know?" Another pause. This one longer, heavier. "Look, man, I don't want to make this awkward, but people are kind of weirded out by everything that went down with Emma and Greg. It's not just you, but, yeah, it's been tough for everyone." I felt a lump form in my throat. I knew what he was saying without him having to say it outright. I was the problem. "So, what?" I asked, my voice tightening. "People are blaming me for what happened. Is that it?" "No one's blaming you," he said, but his tone was uncertain. Like even he wasn't sure what the truth was. It's a lot. Man, Emma's still really upset. And Greg's been going through it. People don't want to get involved. You know?" I didn't say anything. What was there to say? It was clear that no one wanted to get involved, which meant no one wanted to deal with me. I wasn't just the guy who made the mistake. I was the reminder of all the drama no one wanted to face. After a few more awkward pleasantries, I ended the call. As I hung up, I realized that the friendship I had with Jake, the one that had survived college and countless other life changes, was as good as over. I wasn't angry with him. How could I be? He was just doing what everyone else was doing, distancing himself from the mess. But it still hurt. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. In the weeks that followed, I watched as more friendships faded into the background. Some people unfollowed me on social media. Others stopped responding to texts altogether. A few stayed neutral, but even their interactions felt stilted, like they didn't want to get too close. I was on the outside now, and no one was going to risk bringing me back in. Losing friends like that wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a sudden break or a single, defining moment. It was slow, painful erosion, like watching a shoreline get eaten away by the tide, day after day. And no matter how hard I tried to hold on, the water kept coming, wearing everything down until there was nothing left. In the end, I had to accept that those friendships were gone. Maybe not forever, but at least for now. I'd become the person no one wanted to be around, the one who reminded them of the chaos they didn't want to deal with. And there was nothing I could do to change that. I tried to focus on the friends who stuck by me, my wife, my family. They were still there, and they still cared, even if everyone else didn't. But it was hard not to feel the weight of the loss. The people I'd built my life around, the ones I'd trusted and leaned on, were no longer there. And even though I understood why, it didn't make it any easier to bear. Guilt is a funny thing. It doesn't hit you all at once. It creeps in, little by little, until it's a constant hum in the back of your mind. After everything that happened, Emma's confrontation, the engagement party, losing friends, it was like guilt had settled into my bones. A weight I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. At first, I tried to push it away. I told myself that what happened wasn't entirely my fault. That Emma and Greg's marriage had been falling apart long before my joke. And that was probably true. At least partially. But that didn't make the guilt go away. No matter how much I rationalized it, the fact remained. My words had set off a chain reaction. And now people I cared about were hurting because of it. I spent a lot of time replaying the events in my head. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, going over every detail of the pool day, the joke, the engagement party. I kept asking myself the same questions. Why did I make that joke? Why didn't I read the room better? Could I have stopped all of this from happening? But the truth was, I didn't have the answers. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe there weren't any answers. Maybe this was just one of those situations where everything went wrong. And no one saw it coming until it was too late. My wife was my biggest supporter during this time. She kept telling me that I couldn't blame myself for the fallout. That there was no way I could have known about Emma and Greg's deeper issues. And while I appreciated her support, it didn't stop the guilt from eating at me. I felt like I had let everyone down, not just Emma and Greg, but my entire group of friends. I had always thought of myself as the laid-back, easygoing guy, the one who could make people laugh and bring everyone together. Now I was the guy who had torn everything apart, even if it wasn't on purpose. The hardest part was accepting that there was no way to fix it. I'd always been a fixer, the type of person who believed that with the right words or actions, any situation could be smoothed over. But this was different. There was no apology big enough to undo the damage. The friendships I'd lost weren't coming back. At least not in the way they used to be. Emma and Greg's marriage wasn't magically going to repair itself because I said I was sorry. And no matter how many sleepless nights I spent agonizing over it, the past wasn't going to change. For a while, I withdrew. I stopped reaching out to people. Stopped trying to explain myself. It felt pointless. Every time I thought about texting someone or showing up at a gathering, I remembered the awkward looks, the whispers, the way people had slowly distanced themselves from me. I couldn't face it anymore. So I pulled back, retreating into the comfort of my own home, focusing on my wife and Max, and trying to pretend that the outside world didn't exist. But, of course, it did. Life went on, and the world kept spinning. Even as my social circle crumbled around me, Max started asking more questions about why we weren't seeing his friends as much. And I didn't know how to answer him. I hated that my mistakes were affecting him, too. He was just a kid. And he didn't deserve to be caught up in this mess. My wife and I tried to fill the gaps by arranging more one-on-one playdates with kids from his school. But it wasn't the same. Our old group, the one that had felt like a second family, was no longer part of our lives. And Max could sense that something had changed, even if he didn't fully understand why. I think the turning point came one night, when my wife and I were sitting on the back porch after Max had gone to bed. It was one of those quiet summer evenings where the air was thick and still. And the only sound was the occasional chirp of crickets. We hadn't talked about the whole situation in a while, mostly because I had stopped bringing it up. But that night, as we sat there in the fading light, she turned to me and said, "You need to let this go." I looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean? You've been carrying this guilt around for weeks," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I see it in the way you talk, the way you act. You keep going over everything in your head, trying to figure out what you could have done differently. But it's done, and you can't change it. You've apologized, you've tried to fix things. But at some point, you have to move on." Her words hit me hard. But I knew she was right. I had been stuck in this loop of guilt and self-blame for too long. No matter how much I tortured myself with what-ifs, it wasn't going to undo what had happened. The friendships that had faded were gone. At least for now. And as much as it hurt, I had to accept that. But moving on wasn't as simple as just deciding to do it. It took time. Slowly, I started to come to terms with the fact that some things are beyond our control. I couldn't control how people reacted to my joke. I couldn't control Emma and Greg's marriage. And I couldn't control how my friends chose to respond to the fallout. All I could control was how I moved forward. I began focusing more on the people who were still in my life. My wife had been a rock through all of this. And I realized that I hadn't been as present for her as I should have been. Max, too, he needed me. And I couldn't let my own guilt and isolation affect my ability to be a good father. I threw myself into being there for them, finding joy in the small, everyday moments that I had been too distracted to fully appreciate. Eventually, I reached out to a few people who hadn't completely cut me off, those friends who had remained neutral or had quietly stayed on the sidelines. I didn't expect things to go back to the way they were. But I wanted to try to rebuild, even if it was in a different way. I invited a couple of them over for a barbecue at my place. Nothing big, just a low-key evening. To my surprise, they came. It wasn't the same as before, there was a little more distance. A little more awkwardness, but it was a start. We sat outside, grilled burgers, and talked about life, avoiding any mention of the past few months. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe things could get better. Even if they were different now. I've come to realize that friendships, like anything else in life, aren't always permanent. They change, evolve, and sometimes fade. People grow apart, life gets in the way. And sometimes, one bad moment can unravel years of trust. It's painful, but it's part of the deal. And while I'll always regret the way things went down with Emma and Greg, I've accepted that it's not something I can change. What I can do is be more mindful moving forward of my words, my actions, and how they might affect the people around me. I've learned the hard way that even the smallest joke can have consequences you never see coming. And while I can't undo the past, I can take those lessons with me into the future. I still miss the friendships I lost. I still think about Emma and Greg sometimes, wondering if they ever managed to work things out. But I don't let it consume me anymore. Life moves on, and so have I slowly. But surely, I'm finding my way back to a place where the guilt isn't so heavy. Where I can look forward instead of backward. It's not perfect, but it's something. And for now, that's enough. Life moves on, whether you're ready for it or not. It took me a while to accept that. To realize that the world wasn't going to wait for me to work through my guilt and self-reflection. The friends I lost, the group that had once felt like a second family, it was gone. And as much as I tried to fix it, to rebuild those connections, I knew deep down that things would never go back to the way they were. But maybe that was okay. In the months that followed, I found a new rhythm in my life. It wasn't the same as before, but it didn't need to be. I focused on the people who were still there, my wife, Max, and a few close friends who had stuck by me, quietly offering their support even when they didn't know exactly what to say. I found comfort in the small, everyday moments, playing with Max in the backyard, sharing quiet evenings with my wife, and rebuilding my social life one small interaction at a time. I never heard from Emma again, and I stopped expecting to. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of her or Greg through mutual friends' social media posts, never together. Always at separate events. From what I could gather, their separation became permanent. Whether or not my joke was the final straw or just another bump in an already rocky road, I'll never really know. It's not something I'd ever ask anyone about. And honestly, I don't think I need to know. It's their story now, not mine. The funny thing about guilt is that, over time, it dulls. It never fully goes away, but it stops feeling like a sharp, immediate pain and becomes more like a lingering ache. I still think about what happened sometimes. Late at night when everything's quiet and my mind starts to wander. I still wonder if there was anything I could have done differently. If there was a way to stop the fallout before it started. But those thoughts don't haunt me the way they used to. They're just memories now, part of the past, like so many other things. One day, a few months after everything had blown up, I ran into Greg. It wasn't planned. We bumped into each other at a grocery store, of all places. Both of us standing in line at the checkout. He was by himself, looking tired and a little worn around the edges, like someone who had been carrying more weight than he should have for too long. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I could feel the tension. The awkwardness of two people who used to be friends but had since drifted so far apart they weren't even sure if they could exchange pleasantries anymore. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, or if I should just pretend I didn't see him, but something in me couldn't let that moment pass without at least acknowledging it. "Hey, Greg," I said, my voice uncertain. "How's it going?" He glanced over at me, his expression unreadable. For a second, I thought he might just turn away, ignore me, and leave it at that. But then he nodded, a small, almost imperceptible motion, and muttered, "Hey." It wasn't much, but it was something. There was a long, uncomfortable pause as the line moved forward. I didn't know if I should say more or just leave it at that. But eventually, Greg broke the silence. "Look, about what happened," he started, his voice low and tired. "I know things got messed up. I'm not saying I'm not still angry. But I also know it wasn't all your fault." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to apologize again, to tell him how sorry I was for everything that had happened. But I also knew that there was no point in dredging it all up again. Instead, I just nodded. "Yeah, it got pretty messed up." I agreed quietly. He didn't say anything for a while, just stared ahead as the cashier scanned his groceries. But before he left, he turned back to me, his expression softening just slightly. "I guess we're all trying to move on. In our own ways," he said, his voice quieter now. "I don't know if things will ever be the same. But I don't hold a grudge." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was the closest thing I was going to get. And that was enough for me. "Thanks, Greg," I said, meaning it. "I appreciate that." He nodded again, grabbed his bags, and walked out without another word. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it didn't need to be. It was a moment of closure. A quiet acknowledgement that life had moved on. And we both had to move with it. After that, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't expecting things to magically go back to the way they were. And I didn't expect to suddenly be invited back into the fold of my old friends. But in that moment, I realized that I didn't need those things to find closure. Greg's acknowledgement, his understanding that it wasn't all my fault, was enough. As time went on, I focused on building new connections. Not necessarily replacing the friendships I had lost, but creating something new. I got closer to a few parents at Max's school. People who weren't part of the old group and didn't know about the drama. I started hosting small gatherings at my house again, inviting people over for casual dinners or game nights. It wasn't the same as before, but it was something, and slowly, I began to feel like I was part of a community again. My wife was right. I had to let go of the past, to stop replaying the events over and over in my head, and focus on what was ahead of me. Life didn't stop because I had made a mistake. Friendships ended, people moved on, but new things always took their place. There were still moments, of course, when I missed the old days. I missed the easy camaraderie, the familiarity of a group of people who had known me for years. But I also realized that life is full of changes, and sometimes, you can't go back, you can only go forward. In the end, I learned that friendships, like anything in life, are fragile. They require care, attention, and sometimes, They break. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. Or that you've failed. It just means you're human. I still don't know if I'll ever fully repair the damage that was done. Emma and I are strangers now. And I've made my peace with that. Greg and I may never be friends again. But we've both found our own way of moving on. And as for the rest of the group? Well, some ties were meant to be cut. And I'm learning to be okay with that. Life is bittersweet that way. You lose people, but you also gain new ones. You make mistakes, but you learn from them. And eventually, you find a way to move forward. Even if the road isn't exactly the one you thought you'd be walking. I don't know where the next chapter of my life will take me. But I do know that I'm ready to face it, guilt, mistakes, and all. And that's enough.